Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Zamora, and today I'll be talking about the Italian Renaissance. But before I get into the presentation, let me give you a little bit of background information surrounding the topic. The Italian Renaissance was an era in Italian history that began sometime from the 14th century to the 17th century. It marked the beginning of the modern age and the end of the Middle Ages. The Renaissance gave birth to a new way of thinking, and in Italy, it gave birth to cultural revitalization. This is mainly due to Cosimo de' Medici and later on his family, who would in turn heavily fund some of the greatest artists of their time: Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and Sandro Botticelli, to name a few. Today, I'll be exploring what other factors went into making Italy the birthplace of the Renaissance, because while other countries did experience their own Renaissance, such as England and France, Italy would be the first country in Europe to experience that Renaissance. While there is no doubt that the Medici family made a tremendous impact on funding the Renaissance, countries such as France had both the money and power to be able to fund their own Renaissance earlier. It is apparent that there are other factors to consider when scholars discuss the success of the Renaissance in Italy. Thus, to what extent was the Medici family responsible for making Florence the birthplace of the Renaissance? So firstly, we have the Black Plague. Undoubtedly one of the most tragic events in history. Many scholars agree that the Black Plague was one of the greatest catalysts for the Renaissance in Italy. While it may seem a little contradictory to believe that one of the deadliest events in the Middle Ages helped the country flourish, it is important to consider how the Black Plague impacted the country culturally. One of the more well-known works that came from the Black Plague was Giovanni Boccaccio and his work, the Decameron, which was a collection of stories that would greatly influence the author of the Canterbury Tales, which would be written decades later. One of the most important things to consider was how the plague served as a grim reminder of one's own mortality. As Stefani puts it in his work, the Florence Chronicle, published in the late 1370s, physicians could not be found because they had died like the others. In all the city there was nothing to do but to carry the dead to a burial. It reminded the people of the time that in the face of utter destruction, our status had no bearing on our place in heaven. Because of the Black Plague, this event led many to adopting the philosophy of humanism, where people of Italy will look inwards and observe the perseverance and greatness of the human soul in times of great turmoil. And as you can see in the graph provided, Italy was among the first countries to experience the Black Plague. And this idea of humanism is most apparent in the artwork that was produced before and after the Renaissance. A good example of the plague's impact would be observing the paintings of Saint Sebastian. A little backstory first: Saint Sebastian is the patron saint of athletes and soldiers, at least initially, where he would be known as a protector against the plague after the Renaissance. During the Diocletianic persecution of Christians, he was tied to a post and shot at with arrows by archers. His story would be painted with the context provided, where paintings would depict him tied to a post, arrows protruding from his body, and archers aiming at him. Scholars such as Louis Marshall would point out the absence of the archers in many of the paintings well after the plague. This suggests that the people were beginning to see it less of a story and more of an icon. With the imagery of the arrows protruding out of his chest, many people saw it as a metaphor for their current struggles, with the arrows representing the plague and Saint Sebastian representing humanity. A more famous example for how the Black Plague impacted art was the mural created by Michelangelo on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel at the Vatican, named The Creation of Adam. Here's one of the earliest depictions of God as an old man in rags. It was a controversial choice to depict him as such, since he was always written as an omnipotent, powerful being. Framing him as a human coincides with the belief of humanism, once again finding greatness in yourself. Secondly, the printing press, which was made by Johannes Gutenberg. His invention would be distributed all over Europe, and it revolutionized the way information was shared. Before the printing press, only a select few people had access to books, since most of them were either the original copy or were meticulously copied by a scribe. Not only did it allow the common person access to books and literature, but it came at a much cheaper price. This also allowed the already intelligent scholars and artists of society, it gave them greater access to an even greater wealth of knowledge for their careers. This overall helped spread the art that was being produced and also educated the population on a scale never before seen. And lastly, we have the fall of Constantinople. And while it may seem a little bit strange to list this as a reason for the Renaissance and Italy flourishing, it is important to consider where the people within that country went to after the war. The people of Constantinople were Christians, and in Nesbit Bain's article titled The Siege of Belgrade by Muhammad II, he describes that the people of Christendom were threatened by the incoming forces. Since Muhammad and his people followed a different religion entirely, the people of Constantinople would be persecuted under his rule. As a result, a majority of them went to Italy. Even though there were some differences between them, a lot of their culture meshed well with Italy's. So with the fall of Constantinople, the war brought refugees to Italy, but most notably, the scholars and artists of that countries that came along with their own knowledge and mythos. So conclusion. While there are many other factors to consider, I believe these are the three biggest factors into what made Italy the birthplace of the Renaissance, with the Black Plague being at the top for how it impacted the worldview of Florentine citizens and reframed their culture, to focus on humanism. While I don't think that what I've discussed today is anything groundbreaking, I do believe that it is a topic that is often overlooked, especially when we compare countries that fit the criteria that Italy had, such as France, Spain, and England. One of the obstacles that I had to face was the lack of verifiable data. I was able to find trends between sources with the nature of the topic, but a lot of data simply did not exist, such as the death toll of the Black Plague in Italy or the number of refugees from Constantinople. And that marks the ending of my presentation. Thank you for listening, and here are my sources.